I don't know what it is about writing. I mean, you just keep trying, even when you've had success, and you think, well, I don't have to write anymore. I've got money in the bank. I can just stop. But there's always like, yeah, but if I could write just one more book, maybe it'll be perfect. It'll be the one where because every book that you do, you look at it and think, yeah, it's okay, but this part wasn't great, or I could have done better there.
Yeah.
So I was trying to write that book that'll be just the one.
Hello and welcome to another episode of The Conversation with your host, Nadine Matheson. As always, I hope that you're well, and you may have noticed that this is a double episode week. And the reason why you're getting a double episode week is because we are winding down to the end of season 3. I know. But it's been a long season. We started, I think, way back in September. And the season's going to end next month in July. So don't worry, don't panic. You know, we've got a little while to go, but we are winding down, which is why you are getting these double episodes. And before we start today's conversation, can I just take a moment to say how much I enjoy being the host of this podcast? I enjoy the conversations that I have with all of my guests. They are always inspiring, entertaining, enlightening, and I enjoy hearing the reactions from the listeners. This podcast is growing and it's amazing to see. And I'm going to have a small request for you. You know, I always have a small request. I'll usually make it right at the end of the conversation. But my request is, if you have enjoyed this conversation and previous conversations, can you please take a moment to leave a review? You don't have to write an epic essay. You can just leave a short comment. You can just hit the like button. If you can, I think on Apple Podcasts, you can highlight the stars. But the reviews, the comments, the likes, the subscriptions, the follows, they really help the podcast. I'm not sure how. I don't know how algorithms work, but they work and it really helps the podcast. And in addition to leaving a review to show how much you love the podcast, you can also buy me a cup of coffee. You could buy 1, you could buy 2, you could buy 10. It's completely up to you. But what it does, by supporting the podcast through the reviews and through buying me a cup of coffee or even becoming a Patreon subscriber, it means that I can keep the podcast going, because I'll be honest, it takes a lot of work. But even though it takes a lot of work and hard work, I enjoy it. So thank you. Now let's get on with the show. Today, I'm in conversation with New York Times and Sunday Times bestselling author Linwood Barclay, whose new novel, Whistle, as I said, is out today. And in our conversation, we talk about the right time for success, the anxiety of writing, and the best advice for writers. The only reason why I'm laughing is because the advice is so not what you think. It's so not what you think, but it's funny. So, as I always say, sit back, we'll go for a walk and enjoy the conversation. Linwood Barclay, welcome to The Conversation.
Thank you, Nadine. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
Right. It might be a bit of a deep question, but if I was to ask you, who is Linwood Barclay? How would you describe yourself?
I'm just some guy who writes books and lives in Canada, and you know, I mean, it's, you know, how do you describe yourself without sounding either, you know, completely self-deprecating or ridiculously foolish? You know, I mean, I'm a guy who always wanted to write. I spent 30 years working in newspapers and before my career in writing. I mean, all I wanted to do when I was a kid in my teens was write novels. And somehow, you know, when you're at the age of 22 and come out of university and think you're a genius, then you send your books out to various publishers to read because you just know you're going to be a best-selling author overnight. And you start getting all these things back in the mail that they didn't for some strange reason didn't want them, you know. And I used to say that I could take a manuscript, and of course back then, you know, you printed it out, you packed it up. I could take a manuscript and take it to the post office and mail it off to some big publisher in New York, and it was back before I got home. Like they were already there, you know. That's just, we don't want this. I always liked, they always used to say this, the rejection slips would often say, "This does not suit our current needs," which seemed to suggest when we need a really badly written book, we'll be in touch.
But I always feel that you kind of need that bravery, especially when you're in your 20s.
Yeah, you know, so That's why I went into newspapers. I thought, well, where can you get paid money to write every day? And so that's where I ended up.
I was going to ask you, so how do you keep going though? Because, now we always talk about rejection a lot on the podcast, and it's how do you keep motivating when you are getting those? Because I remember, I always say I sent off a manuscript when I had no business sending it off, and it kept coming back in the same, because you have to do a self-addressed envelope. So I'd see my handwriting on the envelope and be like, oh, they sent it back.
Yeah, I mean, and of course I had a lot of that kind of rejection in my early 20s, probably going up to 25 or so. In fact, I had one wonderful rejection letter that was a page and a half long, single spaced, from an editor in Canada, who years later ended up becoming not only John Irving's editor, but his wife. And I ran into her at a party in Toronto, because they live in Toronto, not too long ago. And I said, I still save this letter. It's the nicest rejection letter I ever got. Because it was like, there's a lot here that's good, but it's not for us. But and I said, all these years later, I think I got that letter in 1981. So I said, so 40 some years later, thank you. I said, it was a lovely letter.
Did you ever know what they meant when they said this isn't for us? Like, did anyone ever go that one step further and explain?
Oh, well, they did usually, and I don't. And all these years later, I kind of understand why. I mean, publishers, they're not writing coaches. You know what I mean? Like, we either want this or we don't. And if we don't, you can have it back. And we're not going to bother to explain why, because that's not our job. And so I look back and I just think I wasn't good enough, and it took a while to get to that point.
Yeah. Did you recognize when you were good? Could you see it?
Well, I don't know. That's a tough question, because I think as an author, you're always your worst critic. I mean, the biggest success I ever had was a novel called No Time for Goodbye, which was a Richard and Judy pick. It was the top selling novel of the year in the UK in 2008. And the day after I finished writing that, I printed it out and I sat down and I read it from beginning to end. And I thought, God, what a pile of junk this is, So we really are not the best judge of what our stuff is, because, and the flip side is, there are plenty of people out there who look at their own stuff and think, my God, I'm a genius. And then anybody else reads it and thinks, no, you're not. So I don't know. I mean, I didn't have my first novel didn't come out until 2004. And it took an agent to recognize that there was something good in it, And, I'd had some other books published before that in Canada. There were some humor books and some political satire, but the 2004 was the first novel. And like I said, you sometimes need another set of eyes to look at something and assess it and see whether there's something there or not.
Yeah, you can't see it, no matter how many times. And I think because you've gone over this piece of work so many times, when you've done your draft and then done the rewrites and the edits, whatever someone else sees, you just can't see it.
I think you can't just see what's not working. You don't even see what is working.
Yeah.
Like, people will say, oh my God, that chapter or that part was so great. And I'm thinking, oh, okay. I'll take that. All the people will say, I won't say which book it is, but people will say, this one of these books, this book that you wrote, that's my favorite of all of your books. And I'm thinking, I don't even like that book. Like, should I argue with them? Would it be rude to tell them they're wrong?
It's weird. I felt that way with my book, The Jigsaw Man, and one of the killers in there, Peter Olivier. I always said he was just a device when I put him in the book, just to keep the plot moving. I didn't plan for him to be a central character in any way. And then my agent and my editor, they'd come back and say, oh no, we like him, we want more of him. And I'm thinking, why? I can't see why you want more of him.
I know. That's one of the great things about having good editors and good agents is that they can spot things that you've missed. They can identify. Sometimes they can. This is more when there's a problem. Like I've had editors who identified a problem in one of my books and they didn't have a solution. They didn't know how to fix it. I mean, the editor said, look, I don't think this is working and I don't know how to tell you to fix it. That's your problem. And so then I have to take a look at it and think, okay, maybe they're right. Maybe this is not working, but I'm the best one to try to find a solution anyway. And so remember in one of the books, the editor I was working with at the time, great guy in London. And he said, I don't think this works, but what if the ending was this? And I said, that's stupid. I said, that's a really dumb ending, but what if we did this? And he said, yeah, that works. So sometimes a really good editor can pinpoint a problem and get you thinking about how to fix it, even if they don't have a solution.
Yeah. No, I think that's 100% true. But sometimes, do you ever have to like battle with your ego though? Because I felt that with my last book. Like I had this scene, I felt like I was married to this scene and I didn't want to let it go until
authors generally, we're these terribly fragile, pitiful people. That we're destroyed by criticism and, we get puffed up by this and then it just doesn't take much to bring us down. So I've been all up and down or up and down. There's days when I think, that's it, I'm done. I'm not doing this anymore. I've had it. And my wife will say, she'll just sort of listen. And, she knows if she'll wait a couple of days, then I'll get over it.
We'll move on. Linwood, I've been asking this question a lot recently. I think, you can be a good writer. Like it could just be a natural innate talent. But when did you recognize that you were a storyteller?
Well, I don't think at any point I sort of consciously sort of recognized that, la-di-da, but I mean, I started writing when I was like 11 or so. I somewhere 11 years old. And I was writing what we would today call fan fiction.
Yeah.
I had favorite television shows from the 60s. This is well before your time. And I, an episode a week of this particular show wasn't enough for me. So I had to write my own stories using characters created by somebody else. And so when I was in the 6th grade, I got my dad to teach me how to type because handwriting took too long. And so by the time I was 12, I was writing 35, 40-page novellas based on my favorite show. And so I was doing that all through my teens, and as I got older, I was writing, Columbo fan fiction and stuff like that. So I guess I had some sense that I was a storyteller because I kept doing, so I guess that's the case. And I mean, I always had stories going on in my head. We had my parents had at one point bought this cottage resort trailer park, like a caravan park, you call it. And we had this huge property, like acres of property. And so I had this riding lawnmower tractor. And that I was like 12 years old, 13 years old, cutting all these acres of grass. And the whole time that I sat on there, I was making up stories in my head. I probably should get another lawn tractor just when I get stuck on something. I have a yard that's roughly the size of 2 automobiles. So I don't think that a lawn tractor is the answer.
But did you know, so you're doing your fan fiction as this kid of your favorite shows and your dad teaches you how to write. And this may sound like a weird question, but did you know at that age that this could be a career for you? Because I always think,
I knew this what I wanted to do. I mean, when I was in my middle teens, 14 to 17, all through there, what I really wanted to be was a guy who wrote TV scripts. I wanted to write, weekly episodes of television. I thought that would be just great. So that was the kind of writing I was curious about. But I mean, I was writing novels in my late teens and early 20s. So I mean, my hero was a writer named Ross MacDonald, who wrote the Lou Archer series of mystery novels, and there were a couple of them made into movies, and he was a very successful U.S. crime writer. And I wanted to be him. I wanted to be Ross MacDonald, who wrote one meaty novel a year and, put it out there. That was my dream in my teens.
Mm. And then what happened?
It didn't happen. I had to wait a while. So, like I said, and that's why I had this detour into newspapers. Now, when I was hired at the Toronto Star in 1981, which is the largest circulation paper in Canada. I had been a reporter at a couple of other papers for 4 years. And when I got there, I said, I applied for a reporting job. And they said, well, we don't read any reporters. What we're desperate for are really good copy editors. Do you have a lot of editing experience? And I said, sure. Yeah. It was a lie. And so I spent the next 12 years in various editing positions, copy editor, assistant CD editor, news editor, all these sort of editing jobs, running a department, and so forth. And it wasn't, but it was 12 years later when there was an opportunity to do a column, and I applied and got it. And so I spent the next 14 years writing 3 columns a week for the paper. And I think once I got back into that, to that kind of a routine of writing 3 columns a week, now it was kind of like that machinery is now getting oiled all the time.
Yeah.
And it was during my stint as a newspaper columnist that I wrote my first 5 novels while I was still writing 3 columns a week. And it was the 5th book, No Time for Goodbye, that hit it big, and that's when I left newspapers.
How do you always want to know, how do you keep yourself going? Because that moment when you're still doing the day job and you've written these 5 books, but it hasn't hit like stratospheric levels yet. It's like, how do you keep yourself going through those times?
Well, maybe because I had, the first 4 books that I wrote, they were sort of comic thrillers, and they weren't big. They weren't big hits, but I think maybe I would have had to have written more than 4 to become completely discouraged. As I wrote the first 4, and they didn't do great, but I still wanted to be doing that, book a year thing.
Yeah.
And it was book 5 that went supernova. So it's hard to say if the next 4 books had also been not terribly successful, I might have just decided, I'm done. But I got, lightning struck with the 5th one. But, I don't know what it is about writing. I mean, you just keep trying, even when you've had success and you think, well, I don't have to write anymore. I've got money in the bank. I could just stop. But there's always like, yeah, but if I could write just one more book, maybe it'll be perfect. It'll be the one where because every book that you do, you look at it and think, yeah, it's okay, but this part wasn't great, or I could have done better there.
Yeah.
So you're always trying to write that book that will be just the one, you know what I mean? It's just perfect. And it's elusive, that goal.
Yeah, it will never, it'll be something you're continuously chasing, that art of perfection.
It'll never happen. I had a good friend who was an illustrator and writer for the New Yorker magazine in the US. And he was a great illustrator. And he said he never had a drawing that was as good on paper as it was in his head. I get that. It's like I've never had a book that was as good in print as it kind of was in my head. It's that transferring and getting it out there. It's like, it's hard.
How do you battle through that? Because I suppose I don't know if it's like the opposite of imposter syndrome or just another side to it.
I don't know. That's a good question. That imposter syndrome I think is interesting. I read all these other writers who I just know are way better than I am. I read them. People say, well, what do you read? And I say, well, I like to read people who are better than I am, and that gives me lots of choice. And and I read them and I think, man, this is so much better. And so we're always, like I say, like I said earlier, we're always our worst critics. We're always just trying to make it perfect. And it's hard. It's hard to get it. It's hard to satisfy yourself because all you can see are the flaws.
But do you feel like you kind of need that though? So you are constantly striving to write the next book and write a better book, not having that sense of satisfaction.
Oh yeah. I think that there's a real problem probably if you write something and think, my God, that's so brilliant. It's perfect. I don't even need an editor to look at it because it's just so perfect. And, I'm aware of some successful writers who don't want so much as a comma changed in their book. It's because it's perfect. And I think, okay, but you're probably missing an opportunity to make your book better. And because that's what everybody wants. You want it to be the best book it can be. And I mean, I hate getting editing notes back from my editors because I look at it, oh God, they think this is wrong. So, and then I read through all the notes and I go, and then I get really angry because I look at the notes and I realize they're right. That's the really hard.
It's irritating, isn't it?
It's so annoying when you find out that they're right. But then you get back into it and try to polish it up. And I mean, every time I go back into it, I always find something else to fix and make better.
I have this whole routine with my editing notes. The email comes from my editor and I always reply to the email, thank you so much. Like, I'll get back to you. And then I don't actually open the editing notes for like a week because it's like I need to psych myself up for it. And then after the week, then I'll read it and I'll do the whole thing like, actually, it's not that bad. And then I work through it.
It's like Schrodinger's editing notes. It's like Schrodinger's cat. Until you open the box, is the cat alive or is the cat? And if you don't open the file on the notes, it's like, is the book okay or is the book a mess? And as long as you don't know for sure, you can kind of just carry on. But at some point, you have to open it up. Like I'm expecting notes on next year's book fairly soon. And I don't even think I have time to deal with them until July. So I'd be smart not to open it to them, but I won't be able to stop myself. I'll have to open it up and go, well, it's just
You have to kind of work yourself, go through the process.
I know. It's like it's like a ticking time bomb or something,
That's exactly what it is. That's why, even though I leave it for a week, but I'm aware of it. I'm aware of it sitting there in my inbox. I'm aware of it ticking away. And at some point, I'm going to have to open it. I'm going to have to go through it and then move on to the next step.
I think that the period between, I say, what's the hardest part about writing? And I think the hardest part is that period of time between when you deliver the book and you're waiting for the notes.
Yeah.
That's like waiting to get test results back from the doctor. And, I said, am I going to live or have I got like 3 months left? I don't know.
The thing, it doesn't get easier. No matter how many books you write, that moment of, you think you're prepared for it, you can handle it. But that waiting time, it doesn't get any easier.
No, although I found what was even worse. Over the years, I would say I've dipped my toe into this whole business of screenwriting and working with producers and so forth on adaptations of my work. And I've spent many countless hours on that with little to show for it because you spend all this time and then it doesn't get made. But nothing's worse than getting notes that aren't just from one editor, but they're from like a committee. And all these all these different people have something to say about it, and they don't even line up because in the same set of notes you've got stuff that contradicts what the other one's talking about, and it's just sort of like, you know what, I should just throw all this away and just go back into it and try to make it better.
I can't remember who asked me. Someone asked me, I think I was being interviewed for something, and they asked me about books being optioned, and I said the thing about books being optioned in development is that at one point there's a lot of noise. Loads of people are talking at you and you're in conversations with screenwriters and potential directors and all of this. And then it can just go quiet because it doesn't go any further. It doesn't get greenlit.
No, I compare options to reserving a book at the library that you never pick up. You know, this book is mine. I'm reserved this book, but I don't know if I'm going to actually come to the library and get it. I just want to reserve
Yeah, for 3-4 years,
it. Yes,
maybe 5.
or longer. That's right.
For longer. Linwood, with your success, you're talking about having your career in newspapers and you're having a long career in newspapers. Are you glad that it happened when it happened? Or do you think you wouldn't have been ready for it if it happened, if you'd got the success when you were in your 20s, when you did finish college?
I would have been absolutely fine with it happening sooner. But I think things kind of happened the way they're supposed to happen. I mean, I think that I needed first of all, I think that working at a newspaper is like getting an education in everything. Because you're every day you're working on different stories, you're editing different stories. And so it's you're just kind of dropped into the world. So that is a great kind of immersion for a writer to just have spent, like, look at Michael Connelly, who spent all those years as a crime reporter. So that's really good. And then doing the column, 3 columns a week for 14 years, that kind of, as I said, that kind of was doing your training. And so I think that when I finally had some success writing, that's when I was ready for it, because I'd finally I'd gotten good at it by then. And so I don't have any kind of real misgivings about the way things went. I mean, it would have been awesome to have, by the age of 30, be a best-selling writer, but it just didn't work that way for me. I mean, I would much rather have become, a published novelist at 49 than not have become one at all.
Yeah. I always think, like, my 20 years in law, being a criminal defense lawyer, none of that is wasted. None of it. It's all material.
That's all material. And it's just like when they talk about doing research, like, you don't really have to do that much research because it's all there. Like, you've got it all. And so you just write about what you know. So when if I happen to write, like, a couple of my books have involved guys working in newspapers. So, I mean, I know that environment. I know that, I spent 30 years working in newspapers, and I never once heard anybody use the word scoop. So when if I'm watching some movie about a newspaper and a guy runs and says, "We've got a big scoop," I'm thinking, oh, nobody says that.
You have no idea.
Nobody says that. They just say that in movies. And so that kind of, when you've lived in that environment, whether it's newspapers or whether it's law and so forth, there's just a lot of stuff that and that's helpful.
Yeah, I always feel this way about whenever I'm watching programs and it's a court scene and it's a UK court scene, because we don't say objection and we don't move around the courtroom. So whenever I hear someone, I'm like, objection. I can't remember what show it was, and the lawyer said objection. I was like, no. Like, didn't you speak to a consultant? Like, you know nothing. Yeah. This is not right.
Yeah, I know. I remember I watched, there's a newspaper movie that Ron Howard made with Michael Keaton in it called The Paper. I think it was The Paper.
Yeah.
I just hated that movie because Michael Keaton, as the editor, keeps delaying the press is putting the paper to press because he's waiting for this one last bit of information so they can put this story into the paper. And I'm thinking, that can't happen, because if you delay the press run, then the papers don't get on the truck in time, and then the truck doesn't get to the newspaper boxes in time. And it means that in the morning when people are getting on the tube to go to work, there won't be a paper there. And so I I remember one of the best things I ever had said to me, I was working on a big story one night as an editor and was going into the morning edition, which closes at 1:30 a.m. And it's 1:30 in the morning, and I'm in the newsroom, and we're putting the story together. And I think we got the story off our screens into the press room at 1:32. So we were 2 minutes late.
Wow.
And the next night, this editor came over to the head honcho guy came over to me, and he said, "You did a great job last night, but you can't be late." He said, "A newspaper with a completely blank front page will sell more copies than a newspaper that's not there. Because someone's going to buy it for the horoscope or the crossword puzzle or something. But so I always remember that a newspaper that's got a blank front page will sell more copies than one that's not there.
Yeah.
And that always stuck with me, you know?
It's like someone will buy it I remember like my parents buying the newspapers, and even at a young age, like they know I'm going to read the cartoons. So you're right, there's going to be something there.
Somebody's going to buy that paper because they've got a parrot, and they've got to put paper in the bottom of the cage, you know?
You need to line the cat litter tray.
We're a multi-purpose product, what we are.
You know, when you look at publishing, when you look back at your, because I feel like I'm doing This Is Your Life, but we're not doing This Is Your Life. But when you look at your publishing career, is there anything that you think that's like changed for the better when you look at where we are now in publishing in comparison to when you started?
Are you talking about newspapers or books? Or
no,
what?
Books. Yeah, talking about books.
I don't know. I don't think things are better. I think that I think that in the past that a starting author that publishers would nurture an author and move them along, and they would let them go through 3 or 4 books that didn't do hugely well, but they saw potential. By book 6, this guy's going to be really good. Now I think everybody wants an instant bestseller, and they also want the author. Imagine if they'd gone back to, you know, if I'm trying to think of it, you know, what if they said to P.G. Wodehouse, we need you to go on TikTok, and we need you to go on on X, and we need you to do all this stuff. We need you to do all this self-promotion yourself because we're busy, you know, and you know, you've got to, so I think that's harder. I think authors today, there's much more pressure on them to do all these other things to promote themselves that in the past used to be the responsibility of publishers. And like I say, everybody's looking for the next big shiny thing that's going to be a big hit, whether it's vampires or whether it's Da Vinci Code clone books or whether it's the girl on the train who's on a boat who fell off a plane. Like that. And, you know, there's always like, oh, well, this is really big now. So let's do, who's the next Frida McFadden or whatever. Like we got to do. So everybody's chasing what's going to be a success. And so I don't think things are necessarily better than they were.
No.
And also, like, how many, you know, like even just physical books, how many outlets that used to sell books don't anymore. They've stopped selling them. And so, and I also feel like our biggest competition as an author isn't other authors. It's now, oh, there's a new series that dropped on Netflix and we can get all 8 episodes now and we can binge watch them all, which means that over the next 2 or 3 nights, all we're going to do is watch this show that just dropped on Netflix. And this used to be a period of time, an evening when you might have read a book. And now you don't.
Yeah, and also, I mean, the thing of the binging, you know, just dropping 12 episodes all in one go, you know, you lose that space of time of, you lose the anticipation.
Yeah.
So, you know, when we used to have shows weekly, and then you'd fill the space between the next episode the following week.
And I mean, I think authors, we ourselves are you know, the blankets. I remember being at a writers' conference a few years ago, and we were all talking about, oh, are you watching this, or are you watching this show, or are you binge watching this show? And someone said, you know, not one of us has said to the other person, have you read this book? You know,
Wow.
you're all
yeah.
So I guess the hope now is that those of us who write books, at least maybe they'll get adapted into a Netflix show, or so then at least people will become aware of what you did.
But you know what I've noticed, and I said this to someone a few weeks ago on the podcast, is that I've noticed with a few books that I've read recently, it felt as though they were written to be adapted as opposed to just being books.
I don't know. I mean, that's possible. But I mean, I've had people say to me that they feel that my books read as if they were like cinematic or whatever. And And I don't. That's not a deliberate thing, but it is. I think I'm probably influenced more by television than anything else that I watched as a kid.
Yeah.
You know, like to me, chapter breaks are commercial breaks. You know,
Yeah.
and if you have something that's sort of a climactic, pivotal moment, you don't put it in the middle of a chapter. You put it at the end of a chapter, and then you have this sort of interesting thing, which I call white space between the end of this chapter and the next one, and that's your commercial break. That's where you go, whoa, you know, like you take a moment to sort of digest what's happened, and then you run to the bathroom, and then you get some potato chips, and you come back, but. So I do think that I'm influenced by it, but it's not a conscious decision.
Yeah. You know, when you're starting a new book, do you see a scene first, or is it a character? Like, how is it born for you?
Books for me are always start with a what if kind of. What if this happened? And then if I can figure out what set of circumstances brought us to that moment of the what if, and I can figure that out, then I think I've got a book.
Yeah.
And so it doesn't start with a character, doesn't start with a place. It always starts with a what if, like in No Time for Goodbye. What if a girl woke up one morning and the entire family was gone and 25 years went by and she didn't know what happened to them? Like I always want that kind of what if at the beginning.
Yeah. I always thought that you should be constantly asking questions or putting questions to your reader as you're working your way through the book.
And giving them puzzles and giving them and misdirecting them. I love doing that. You know, it's just kind of like you get the reader to look over here because you're doing something over there, and that's fun. But
do you plan that?
Pardon?
Do you plan that, like those twists and those misdirections, or it just happens organically?
It just develop as I'm going along. I just sort of think I know what the story is, and I know what's happening, so I'm in a position to create those diversions to those things that you can look somewhere else while I know that I'm still going over here. And I don't know. It's hard for me to articulate how I do it. It just kind of develops. I always feel like every chapter needs to have, if I can end every chapter with just a tiny little bit of a twist or something that makes you want to carry on.
Yeah, someone, I think it might have been, I was on a panel and they asked me if I planned the twist, and I was like, no, I don't. I don't know it's like chess, you know, trying to think 3 or 4 or 5 moves ahead. It's like, I know what I want to happen. And then sometimes a twist may happen as I'm writing.
And twists are sometimes not as big a twist as what they may appear to be to the writer. It's because it's how you decide to reveal information. Because you know the story, you know what's happening, and it's just how, and it's a sense of timing too. Like I think twists that are, like I said before, I think twists that are delivered in the middle of a chapter lose their impact. If you're going to do a twist, you do it at the end of the chapter, so someone can appreciate that something just happened here. Yeah. But it's, I don't know. It's I guess when I'm writing, I try to think, what can I do here that's not what you expect? Like what's the most logical way to end this chapter? And is there a way I can not do that?
Listeners, it's time for a very short break. If you're enjoying this conversation with Nadine Matheson and want to help keep the podcast going, why not buy me a cup of coffee? Your support goes such a long way in keeping these conversations flowing. Just check out the link in the show notes. I have this question, and I haven't asked it for ages, but is there a piece of advice that you'd wish you'd been told earlier in your career?
I just not sure. I mean, I had some good advice very early, even when I was in my 20s. I mean, I became friends. I had a long correspondence with Ross MacDonald when I was in my late teens and early 20s. There was a very highly regarded, well-known Canadian writer named Margaret Lawrence. Before there was Margaret Atwood, there was Margaret Lawrence. She was a good friend, and she had, good advice and so forth. And I don't think it's so much of a case of advice is unless, I guess the number one thing would be patient, because it's, all good things come to those who wait. It's just, it could take a while.
Yeah.
And that was certainly true in my case. You're going to have to be patient, and you have to persevere, and you have to, I always say to writers, you have to read an awful lot. If you can't be a writer if you're not a reader. And when your mom tells you what you wrote is brilliant, don't believe her. Because
I said that yesterday in a Substack. I'm like, you need to have someone other than your relatives reading like your early work.
If you give this to your spouse or your mother and they tell you it's brilliant, just say thank you. Just say, well, thanks for that. And then carry on. Because what else can they tell you? What are they going to say?
But perseverance, it's so key. And I always say, especially like to new writers, when you finish a book, you finished your first book, and there's this adrenaline rush. You're like, I just want someone to read it. Because like you were saying in the beginning, you think it's brilliant. You think there's nothing wrong with this book, and an agent's gonna sign you. You're gonna get a big publishing deal, and you're gonna be everywhere. And I'm like, no, that book is not ready. That first draft is just for you.
I know it's very humbling. It's a very humbling kind of profession, and it doesn't matter how successful you are, there will always be something that will bring you back down to earth. I went into this just a couple of years ago, and I've been doing very well. I'm on the bestseller list, and I go into a big store in Canada, and it's sort of the equivalent of a Waterstones.
Yeah.
And there's an immense display of stack of my books right up front. And there's a store employee right there. And I said, would you like me to sign these? He said, oh, yes. Look at how wonderful it is that the author would happen in our bookstore. We would love you to sign these. This is just great. And she started to pull all the books up, and she looked at her watch and she said, oh, I'm on break. And she left, and I never saw her again.
Oh, that's going to bruise your ego.
So, that's welcome. Welcome to being famous.
This is it. This is your moment.
This may be exciting for me to meet a big famous author, but I got a break and I'm not missing it.
I'm not missing my break for you.
I'm going for my tea and my biscuit, and you can sit out here and speak your damn self. I don't care.
At least they recognize you, though. I mean, some authors who walk in and they're like, and you are?
Yeah, I know. Oh, I've had that too. I love it when people say, would you have written, you're a writer. Oh, you're a writer. Would you have written anything I've read?
It's the most ridiculous question, because I'm like, I don't know.
Laura Lippman has a great reply to that. She says, I don't know. Are you a famous reader? And, would you have written anything that I've read? And I'm thinking, I don't know. Like, how would I know that? Just, anyway.
Oh, Linwood, before I ask you about your new book, Ristle, right? Why have you moved into supernatural chillers, or I don't know what they're calling it now, horror thrillers?
I'm sorry, what was the question? I missed you there.
I said before I move on to your new book, Ristle, I was going to ask you, why have you moved into supernatural? What do they call it? Supernatural chillers, horror thrillers?
It's sort of horror supernatural whistle.
Yeah.
I will hold it up for you can see it. I just got my first
I've got
copy.
The proof. Oh, I've got I've got the same.
Yeah. I just arrived 2 days ago, and my first copy. So I just had this idea. I had this great idea, and I really wanted to do it, and it was out of my lane. It was more horror supernatural. And I thought, well, I'm really excited about this. I want to write it, and so that had happened, and it was great fun. I've always been a fan of, some of this kind of stuff. I mean, growing up, I was addicted to the Twilight Zone, and I read Ray Bradbury, and I'm an immense Stephen King fan, and I don't read a lot of sort of horror, but this idea sort of fell into that category, and so I thought, well, you know what? And I tell you, I had more fun writing this book than anything else I've done in the last 10 years. I think I just had such a blast writing it.
Did you feel like you had a freedom with it because it was something new?
Yeah, because when you write a regular thriller that takes place in the real world, it has to make sense. It has to, the puzzle pieces have to fit together. It's like a Swiss watch. It's got to work. Whereas when you're writing, and I mean, when you're writing horror or supernatural, you have just a little more freedom to think, I'm going to do something weird here, and I don't really have to explain it. You're still working within that genre. You've got to observe certain rules. You can't be too ridiculous, but you have a little more freedom to do things that you could not do in a conventional thriller that you would think, well, that just wouldn't happen.
Yeah.
But in a book like this, you can do that. And so it was a little bit liberating, a little freeing in doing this book, because I could do stuff I can't do in one of my other books.
But you know what, though? We was talking about politics earlier before we started recording. But I said to someone yesterday, I honestly think with the state of the world and all the craziness that's gone on recently in these last 100 days, I don't think you should ever think, oh, this idea is too far-fetched. Because when you look at what's happened, everything...
If 10 years ago I had pitched that idea for a thriller about a guy with like 30-some felony convictions, including sexual assault, and a complete idiot would become president of the United States, they'd say, well, that would make a great satirical book, but it couldn't really happen in the real world. There's a really great U.S. Writer named Calvin Trillin, and he said that one of the perils of writing satire is that it will be overtaken by actual events, that attempts to mock and ridicule something aren't as ridiculous as the reality. And that's the world that we're currently in.
Has it made you like rethink, well, not rethink, but just think about your role like as a writer, like everything that's been happening, especially being Canadian and all the, the 51st state nonsense?
I think one of the things that's interesting, if we're getting into the whole political thing, is that America and Hollywood together have always fancied themselves to be these, champions of justice and savers of the world, and going out there and righting wrongs. And now America doesn't give a damn. It doesn't care about what happens to Ukraine. It doesn't care what happens here. It's making, and so how does Hollywood, how do story writers, thriller writers based in the U.S., how do they deal with that now? Because really, the president is the villain, in the real world now. And I don't think that America. So I think this is a great time for a huge resurgence of James Bond, because we can you can have a UK based hero who will save the world from all of these Trumpian interlopers. I don't know, something like that.
Yeah, it's a crazy time. I'm just gonna leave it there. It's a crazy time. Before I go on to your last set of questions, would you like to tell the listeners of the conversation what Whistle is about? And then I have 2 questions to ask you about Whistle.
Sure. So Whistle, quickly. First of all, I say that Whistle will do for toy trains, all you Hornby lovers out there in the UK. Whistle will do for toy trains what Chucky did for dolls.
God.
And it's a story about a woman named Annie Blunt, who is a very successful children's author and illustrator who has a kind of double tragedy. One related to her work that was deeply tragic, and she's lost her husband, and she decides to get out of Manhattan and take her son, and they need to just kind of get away from it all and recover from these events, and they go to a small town in upstate New York and rent a house for the summer. And it's in this house where her son finds this box of old toy trains and is delighted about it, and sets them all up. And after the discovery of these things, very strange, creepy things start to happen. Annie, our illustrator, starts hearing train whistles in the night when she's sleeping, and yet there's no active railway line anywhere near them. And she's now, as she tries to get back into work, she finds herself drawing this hideous, evil character that doesn't know where it's coming from, when in the past she was driving this lovely, cute penguin. That's what her artwork was about. And so all this creepy stuff's happening, and it's all tied into something that happened some 25 years ago in a town not too far away. And I mean, that's kind of the overview of this. And I thought, what is it possible? We've got, remember the rocking horse winner, that, from a long time ago, that evil sort of little horse that was evil. We've got evil dolls, we've got evil toys, we've got the little wind-up monkey that kills people.
Yeah, with the symbols.
Why? Well, can we make toy trains evil and creep you out? And the reviews would suggest that you can. That I have somehow managed to make this everyday sort of household toy a very creepy thing, and readers will judge. They'll be the ultimate judge. But I had a blast writing it. It was so much fun, and of course I drew on my experience as a model train enthusiast nerd who's got a big layout in his basement. So I thought, write what you know.
You're living your best life. But I normally have two questions that I ask the guests about their books. But you said you had so much fun with writing your book, because I normally ask, did you face any challenges when writing Whistle?
Well, the one big one was when I started writing it, my intention was that the entire book took place sort of in the present. And as I went along, I thought, well, this box of old trains really harkens back to something that happened a long time ago. And I thought, well, am I going to just have people talk about what happened then and explain what the backstory is? And I thought, no, I have to write everything that happened back then. And so it became kind of two stories in one, or two novels in one. So the book, large sections of the book take place more than 2 decades ago, and then we're back and forth between the present and that. And that was kind of the sort of turning point when I was writing it, as I realized I had to do 2 storylines that would intersect. And once I had that sorted out, once I knew that, then the rest of it just flew.
Okay. And the next one is, if you could spend an afternoon with any of your characters in Whistle, who would you choose and why? So
of all the characters in the book, if there was anyone I'd like to hang out with and see her studio and so forth, it would be Annie, our children's author and illustrator. I mean, my father was an illustrator. He was an artist, and I like people like that. I like creative people. I like to see how they do what they do. And she's a good person. So yeah, I wouldn't mind spending some time with Annie.
Okay. Right, Linwood, this is your last final question to end the conversation. Are you an introvert or extrovert, or a hybrid of the two?
I guess I'm a hybrid. Writing is a very isolating profession. So you were kind of, by the nature of their work, you're kind of introverted. You're not playing with others. You're just kind of doing your thing. But I'm happy to go out and do events and go on stage and talk to people, and so I like that as well. So I'm kind of a mix, I guess. There are times when I think, to go out and talk to a bunch of people, I feel like I just cannot be bothered, but I find that once I get there, I have a good time.
Yeah, you're not the only one. Sometimes you just think, I just need to just stay at home, just be on the sofa, just watch TV and just chill. But once you're there, you're fine.
It's kind of like when the pandemic began, I kind of welcomed it. I thought, this is great. I don't have to go anywhere, I don't have to do anything, I don't have to see anybody. But I would have been fine with that for 2 months. I didn't need it to go on for like 2 years.
No, the 2 years was a problem. Yeah. Okay, so Linwood, what challenge or experience, and I say good or bad, so what challenge or experience in your life shaped you the most?
Oh, that's pretty easy. When I was, my father died when I was 16. And so, and although my dad had been this commercial illustrator, what he did for a living kind of died out. My parents bought this sort of tourist business, and I essentially took over running the family business at 16, doing all the work. My mom managed it, but I did all the work. And I was there in the room when he passed away. So, there's all the stuff that happened. I was a kid up until 16. And then at the age of 16, I had all this responsibility. And so I didn't have these kind of wild, later teenage years where you go out and got drunk and did all this stuff and partying, because I was responsible for this business. I was, to some degree, responsible for my much older brother who was suffering with schizophrenia. And so that was a kind of pivotal moment in my life was when he passed away. And I was very close to him. And one of the last things he said to me before he, in the last few days before he died, because he had cancer going all through him and he was losing his mental abilities. And he said to me one day, he said, "Take care of things." And so I think he knew that it was all going to fall onto me. Mm. How about we end that on a nice downer? Wasn't that just... We were having so much fun, and then you had to ask him...
So much fun, Linwood. Then we
God. You had to tell that story?
Well, we'll do the next one. If you could go back to when you were 25 years old and give yourself one piece of advice, what would it be?
Well, I think it's what we talked about before. Be patient.
Yeah.
Be patient. Things take time. And at 25, I was happy. I had a cool job and wonderful marriage, which I still have. And I think it's just things take time. That would be probably it.
Mm. Okay, so my new one is, what is your non-writing tip for writers? And I always say it could be drink water, but not the usual.
Non-writing is a good one. I have a really good one. A non-writing tip for writers. If you reach a level of success where you're going out and doing events and so forth, don't wear tan khakis, because what happens is, just before you're going to go on stage, you have a glass of water, or you go into the men's room thinking, I'll just hit the men's room before, and then you turn on the tap. This happened to me, okay? You turn on the tap, and the water comes out so fast that it splashes onto the front of your pants, and because you're wearing tan khakis, you have this immense wet blot on the front of your pants, and now you have to go on stage and go on, and you walk on stage, and the first thing you have to say is, you have to say to them, "Let me explain why it happened here." So my big advice for writers is don't wear tan khakis.
I think that's perfect advice.
That's, if you won't get any better advice than that from Lee Child or John Grisham or anyone. They can't. That's nothing will top the tan khakis point.
I don't think it will. And finally, Linwood Barclay, where can listeners of the conversation find you online? I know you on Threads, because I see you on Threads.
So I'm still on X, although I was kind of withdrawing from it. Then I decided to stay on it because it's sort of like pissing in the enemy's tent. And I'm on Blue Sky. I have a Facebook page. I'm on Instagram, but I can't figure it out. Instagram, I'm there, but it baffles me. My wife's on Instagram because she follows stuff that our son is doing. He's an artist, and she'll always hold the phone out. She'll say, "Oh, look at this!" And by the time she gets to me, it's gone. Where does it go? I don't understand Instagram. Like, stuff appears on your screen and then it's gone. I don't get it. Maybe it's that where elephants go to die are things I can't.
Maybe Instagram's just not for you.
It's just not working. I just have to figure it out.
I think you're better on Threads. It's just words.
I'm trying. It's the best I can.
You're doing your best. And that just leaves me, Linwood Barclay, to say thank you very much for being part of the conversation.
It's been a pleasure. I can't wait to see you in London at Capital Crime.
Yes.
I hope that maybe you can ask me then on stage about my top advice for writers. And,
I will.
And maybe if the others on the stage are wearing tan khakis, they'll be grateful that I told them that.
We'll see what Andrew Child is wearing, because that's who you're going to be on stage with. So we'll find out.
I'm just going to crack up.
Thank you so much for listening to today's conversation with Nadine Matheson. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Be sure to tune in every Tuesday for a brand new episode featuring more amazing guests. Don't forget to like, subscribe and leave a review. It really helps the podcast grow. And if you'd like to support the show, you can buy me a cup of coffee or sign up on Patreon. The links are in the show notes. And if you'd love to join the conversation as a guest, feel free to send an email to theconversation@nadinematheson.com. Thanks again for your support, and I'll catch you next time.